Welcome back to another episode of the Jacob Johnston Show. I know the last two videos haven't been up to par. I'm trying to figure out if it's the lighting or the camera. I'm kind of experimenting with both at the time, ever since the upgrades to my studio made the old lightings, well, unusable. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into this episode. So one of the things that you may have heard is that politics is downstream from culture. And if you're looking at the left, you realize we're screwed. We are screwed. This country is going to go under in the next 20 to 30 years. Now, maybe I'm being overly generous with that. And what we are seeing here on the left is we're actually seeing the de-evolution of the left, the de-evolution of our species, going backwards in evolution. I mean, it's really quite remarkable to see, but also scary once you realize the implication. So every election cycle, we get the demographic information. And one of the demographic information that we get is who those with college degrees vote for. And they always want to go off and say that those with a college degree, the college educated, vote for Democrats. And the assumption is the smarter you are, the more you agree and align with the Democrats. Now, which is amazing because the Democrats have a history of failed policies, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake and a lot of miserable people with destroyed lives. I mean, you can't think of any area of the country run by the Democrats and think, yes, this is the model we want for the entire country. You can't find one successful Democrat-controlled city or state. It's all just misery and failures. But the question is about the college-educated elites voting for the Democrats. And who are these people? So I'm going to go ahead and show you what these college-educated elites sound like, using their superior intellect, their college-educated information and knowledge in order to engage in political debates. So let's go ahead and see that superior intellect in action. Well, there you have it, folks. There's your college-educated leftist engaging in rigorous debate. Now, I take a look at that and I go, you know, there's a word for a barking animal of the female gender. I won't say it, but just know there's a word for it. You know, now, what would be interesting, knowing that this is how the Democrats react, is why wouldn't you just have like a tennis ball there and go, woohoo, here girl, fetch. That seems to be about the way to counter this complete stupidity. But we're supposed to believe that these, college-educated really represent superior intellect and information and knowledge. And therefore, that extra knowledge that they paid so much money for leads them to the Democrats, because somehow the Democrats are so genius that their policies fail. And, you know, they really need to request their money back, because if you paid tens of thousands of dollars for a college education, and that's the only response you have to something as far as public opinion debate, instead of actually being able to engage in point, counterpoint, argument, facts, data, your only response to what you don't like that doesn't match up is to start barking? And then we see this starting to go through the rest of the Democrat Party in elected office. So some of you may have seen this. And so this is, Democrats, in elected office, engaging in rigorous debate over issues and winning the public over with their facts and data. Oh my God. I mean, you see that guy? That's a Democrat. And that's his way of trying to counter a Republican woman who is out there talking about the need to protect women's sports from biological men who, for some reason, think that they're women and want to go through and take up all the trophies, medals, and scholarship opportunities away from women because he can't actually compete against men. And so we got Republican out there talking about the issues, the facts, the biological science, and the Democrats' great counterpoint, the intellectual left. The college educated. Yeah, we've known that the education system has been tanking, and well, there's a lot more indication. You see teachers on TikTok who are just having a complete meltdown about not being able to teach kids how to hate each other based off of skin color, and how they try to go off and, talk about they are supposed to be activists, and and then they if you watch any of those, you realize that the education system is filled with a bunch of arrogant know-nothings with complete delusions. They lie. And speaking of, the academics that are responsible for educating the left on how to bark in response to information you don't like, or narratives or opinions you don't agree with, or how to just pound sand on the table and scream like a baboon. Here is the CNN talking about how historians plan to report on President Trump.
Former President Donald Trump has been ranked as the worst president in office during the last 150 years and the fourth worst overall. That's according to a C-SPAN survey that includes the assessments of about 142 historians and professional observers of the presidency.
So that's right. CNN is claiming that historians, and of course they had a guest later on in there, are saying that President Trump was the worst president in 150 years and among the four worst presidents in the entire history of the country. Really? This goes off to show the fraud of the academic community. We have fake news, fake fact checkers, science fraud, and of course, academic pretenders. Maybe I'll try and find a different name for that. But they're going off and they're trying to claim that Trump, who created a booming economy, historic low unemployment, was able to go through and calm North Korea down, create peace in the Middle East, and record time go from outbreak to vaccine. A president who has been more successful in one term than almost any other president has in 2 terms, and they're going to go off and try and say that he was the worst president in over 150 years. Now, this goes off to show that what the academic community is. It's a bunch of political hacks who are just trying to use the perceived credibility in order to basically lie and bullshit the American public. But this goes off and raises a lot more questions, doesn't it? About how much of American history that we have taught has been just complete bullshit. How much of American history have these academics gone through and lied about, rewrote, edited, and put in place, narratives instead of facts? Narratives that have no basis in actual truth, but we didn't have the understanding in the K through 12 education system to question the narrative that we were being given. Of course, if we tried to, the teachers would go no and give you an F if you didn't regurgitate what they said. I mean, this really goes and opens up a lot of questions, considering all the academic fraud, from all of the intellectual lightweights that pretend like they're among the smartest of the smart. But then again, you got to wonder, what is the measure that they are using? Well, I guess if you're anti-American, you hate the country and want to see it fail, then yes, President Trump was among the worst presidents towards your goal of the collapse of the United States. But if you like the country, like freedom and prosperity, President Trump was one of the great presidents, if not the greatest president that we had in the history of the country. But, this is the left. Anything that's good for the country, they're pissed off about and they get upset about. Anything that hurts the country, and they cheer it on. Haven't you ever noticed how much they celebrate when you're suffering? And so, yes, the academic community has no credibility left. The media has no credibility. The scientific community is lacking in credibility, considering how many times they have been caught lying to us, not just about climate change, but also about the coronavirus. And when we get to climate change, there is natural climate change, and then there's what they call man-made climate change. And they keep pushing man-made climate change, and they have yet to provide any actual evidence or any proof of their claim. They just keep claiming it and hope that if they repeat it enough, you'll just accept it as true. Instead, we got a lot of natural climate change. Now, if people are contributing to climate change, guess what? It's not CO2 emissions. You stop trying to push that. It's failed. 50, 60 years of you trying to push that, and you haven't yet been able to establish a correlation, let alone causation, between CO2 emissions, fossil fuels, and climate change. All right? It's time for you to try maybe a different approach. But we got these academic frauds, these historians now, who are now trying to not only lie to the students and lie to the public about America's history, but now they're trying to lie and rewrite history in real time. And so now we know what the narrative is that they plan to put into the academic textbooks for future generations. And that is the claim that one of the most successful presidents was one of the worst presidents. My God, this is unbelievable that they will go through and do this. And yet, CNN has another report about rising hate crime. And it's surprising that they did this, considering what it is that they are admitting to, even though they're not coming out and blatantly saying it. So let's go ahead and see what CNN's reporting on rising hate crime looks like.
A man was stopped at the door of a South Florida synagogue recently. Then police say he left feces outside, spat at a menorah.
We live in a world where hate is easy.
And Jews are the most targeted religious group in America, says the FBI, and it's getting worse.
We've seen an alarming increase in hate crimes across the country, many targeting members of the Asian American Pacific Islander and Jewish communities.
12% of Americans told pollsters that Jews in this country have too much power. Jews eating sushi in Los Angeles last month sought out by young pro-Palestinian men.
Get inside!
Men in the cars got out, started running toward the tables and asking indiscriminately who's Jewish.
A Jew brutally beaten by young men in Times Square, New York. He was surrounded by a group that began to
kick me, punch me, assault me with weapons, and also pepper spray or mace me. I don't even know which one, for good measure at the end.
Some also call out members of the squad for the likes of this and this. Last month, Representative Cori Bush of Missouri tweeted, "The Black and Palestinian struggles for liberation are interconnected." Congresswomen say they stand against all forms of hate, that they are legitimately criticizing the Israeli government. Others see it differently, that Israel and Jews are used as scapegoats.
Now, it's amazing that video got through the editing room floor over there at CNN, because what it's admitting to, even if it doesn't mean to, is that while hate crime is on the rise, it's coming from the left. I mean, you're not going to find anyone on the right that is supporting the so-called Palestinians over Israel or the Jews. You're just not. And they're also admitting here that it's elected Democrats that are egging on the violence against the Jews here in the United States by constantly trying to go off and attack Israel for defending itself from the terrorist attacks of Hamas. They've gone off and said, okay, if Hamas attacks Israel, that's not an issue. But if Israel responds to the attack, that's the problem. That is, terrorism. Defending yourself from terrorism is terrorism. Well, we've already covered the de-evolution of the left. At least Ocasio-Cortez and the squad are not resorting to barking like their leftist base whenever confronted with facts that they do not like or debunks their argument. But yes, so you see the rising hate crime. It's by leftists being supported and egged on by elected Democrats. Now, does CNN mean to let that information out? No. But one of the things that you could probably take away from that video from CNN is that they are now pushing back against the squad. They are now going to start calling out Ocasio-Cortez, maybe. While she may have been useful in trying to prop her up, no matter how stupid she was, in order to try and attack Republicans, or in order to try and, use her social media influence where the idiots flock to her in order to hear what stupid dumb butt things she has to say. Now, while trying to take advantage of her social media presence in order to try and, prop her up and, attack the Republicans, now that the Democrats are in charge and you see everything going to crap, well, now she's becoming a bit of a liability along with the other squad members. So now it may be safe to start calling them out and trying to push back on them. And maybe it's time to kind of take them out. Of course, it is questionable whether or not Ocasio-Cortez is going to have a seat to run for in 2022. Remember, redistricting is happening between now and the next election. And New York lost a couple of congressional seats. How much do you want to bet the Democrats will redistrict Ocasio-Cortez out of her seat? Oh, man, that's going to be fun. That's going to be fun to watch. And, of course, the Democrats being completely stupid, they, of course, have this overinflated and undeserved ego, and they think you're stupid, which is why you have Jen Psaki, the daily, propaganda that they claim as a press briefing, the daily bullshitting, comes out and tries to make the dumbest statement in order to try and claim it's Republicans trying to defund the police. Here, this has got to be the award. I mean, this even tops leftists barking and acting like baboons pounding their desk. This is the top indication of the de-evolution of the left. Let's go ahead and take a look.
Which Republican ever said that they did not like the American Rescue Plan because they wanted to defund the police?
Well, first, let me just note that the president ran and won the most votes of any candidate in history on a platform of boosting funding for law enforcement after Republicans spent decades trying to cut the cops program.
Are there any examples of Republican members of Congress saying they want to defund the police?
I think most people would argue that actions are more important than words, wouldn't you say? If you oppose funding for the cops program, something that was dramatically cut by the prior administration and many Republicans supported, and then you vote against a bill that has funding for the cops program, we can let other people evaluate what that means. It doesn't require them to speak to it or to shout it out. Their actions speak for themselves.
Now, the only intelligent thing that she actually said in all of that was that actions speak louder than words. And the actions of the Democrats show that they are violent, racist, anti-American authoritarians, despite all of the words that they try to claim to the contrary. Now, as far as her claim that it was Republicans that went to defund the police, she's using the dumbest argument whatsoever. So you got here a bill. Now, first of all, she tries to say that Biden ran on increasing funding for the police. No, I'm pretty sure he ran on the whole police are horrible, racist, garbage people that need to be defunded. But that is besides the point here. So in any event, they try to go off and say, well, we had this bill here, and this bill increased funding for law enforcement. But did it really? For law enforcement? Specifically for law enforcement? Or the left's reimagining of what law enforcement could be? But let's just go off and say, okay, maybe it had some funding for law enforcement. Right? And the Republicans voted against it. But that funding was included inside of another bill that had funding for about 100 other things. So let's see here. You have a bill that provides 1% funding, 1% of its funding, maybe, going towards police. And then the other 99% of the funding goes towards a bunch of horrible leftist garbage. A bunch of stuff that we can't afford to do, a Democrat's wish list of funneling taxpayer funds back into their campaign coffers. So if you vote against 99 horrible things, it must mean that you're against the one thing that, isn't bad? No, never is that the case. If it was a bill solely focused on funding the police, every Republican would have supported it. Every Republican would have voted and passed it. But you can't just sneak in funding for one item that you would agree with and then say, well, if you don't vote for the other 99 things, that means you don't support this one thing. Bull crap. That is, they are just stretching here. They are desperate because they ran on the whole defund the police movement. That's how they ran their entire 2020 election. And during that time, all you saw was rising crime, domestic terrorism, violence, all coming from the left. And now we see, with the left in control of D.C., of the House, Senate, White House, that violence is continuing to rise, especially in Democrat-controlled areas. And so they are scraping the very bottom, twisting themselves into mental pretzels in order to try and create a narrative in which the Republicans were the ones defunding the police or trying to block funding for the police just because there was one out of, 300 items in a bill that related to police funding? And the other 100 to 300 items, well, you're supposed to support the other 100 items just so you can support the police. No one's buying that crap. All right, no one's buying that crap. And so we got a complete clown at the White House podium showing the complete de-evolution of the left. From their base barking to the state legislatures pounding their desks like a bunch of baboons, to the White House press secretary showing what a complete and total moron she is, what a fraud, liar, and zero credibility. It's not a daily press briefing, it's the daily propaganda briefing. All right, so that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss another episode. Don't forget to hit the like button and leave comments down below. Thank you so much, and I will be back again soon.